On today's show, there are 28 games left in the regular season for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and they still have things that they need to accomplish and prove before the end of the regular season. I brought in Spencer Davies from Cleveland Cavaliers on SI to talk about all that and so much more on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like 92.3 The Fan, my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, and a number of other stops along the way. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. There are 28 games left in the regular season for the Cleveland Cavaliers. And the first 54 of them, however many they played, right, 54, have gone better than I think anyone could have expected. But they still have to clinch the 1 seed. They still have to prove that this is stuff that we can see in the postseason and something that is very transferable from the regular season to the playoffs. So brought in Spencer Davies. We talk a lot about that and really just put out the three questions, I guess, that we want to see answered between now and the end of the regular season before the postseason arrives for the Cavs. So without anything else from me, here's that conversation. And to talk about what the Cavs need to do the rest of the season, and of course, at the All-Star break, they have the best record in the Eastern Conference. They're on track to be the number 1 seed, maybe the number 1 seed in basketball, but they still have work yet to be done. So Spencer Davies from Cleveland Cavaliers on SI here, as we're going to talk about the 3 things that we look at as to what the Cavs can still accomplish this regular season, what they need to do to get ready for the postseason. So Spencer, I had you put together 3 things. I put together 3 things. I don't know what your 3 things are. You don't know what my 3 things are unless you hacked into my computer, which I don't know if you did or didn't do. I'm going to assume not. But I want to start with the first thing on your list. What is the number 1 thing that you look for and say, okay, this is what we can still learn or what we can see from the Cavs for the rest of the regular season?
Third quarter. The first thing that Kenny Atkinson talked about.
I did not have that.
First thing that he talked about after that game, even though it was a win in DeAndre Hunter's debut, that was the first thing that he brought up. Was it's been consistently our worst quarter all season long. It's something that we need to get better at coming out of halftime, more of a defensive mindset. You know, they were kind of going shot for shot with Anthony Edwards in that game. The first 5-6 minutes, it was the Wolves that were down big going into that, but they cut it down to 16 or 18. And so that's just one example of where the Cavs have kind of rested on their laurels a little bit coming out of halftime, and they just need to get a little bit more focused when they have those kind of leads in the third quarters. They obviously come back and do their thing in the fourth quarter. They're the top fourth quarter scoring team in the league, but those third quarters is one place where in the playoffs, if you have a run that happens like that, momentum can shift quickly. So I feel like that's a good focus area for them.
Right. So the Cavs have been one of the best teams in the NBA in first, second, and fourth quarters. Their net rating in the first quarter is plus 15.3. Their net rating in the second quarter is above 12. Their net rating in the fourth quarter also really good. And of course, we are recording this before the game against Toronto, the final game of the All-Star, before the All-Star break. But the Cavs are the best fourth quarter team in basketball. And in the third quarter, they're like a plus 3.5 going into that game against Toronto, which is fine. That is, as things stand right now, 10th in the NBA, which is a fine place to live, but it has not been up to the standard for what the team has done in the other 3 quarters. And I do think it's an interesting thing because we've gone through spurts, Spencer, too, where I think they've been really good in the third quarter. Think back to when they went out west, and there were a few of those games, the Lakers game, the Warriors game, the Nuggets game, where they came out of the locker room for halftime, and that's when they took over those games. We just haven't seen that happen frequently enough. It almost feels as if they have been inevitable in terms of just dominating teams, with the exception of that quarter. That is when they've looked more is there something that you look at and say, okay, this is how they can get better there? Or is there just a mindset thing?
I think it's more of a mindset thing. defensively, we know what they're capable of, and obviously with DeAndre Hunter adding the mix, they're looking to get those turnovers back up. They're trying to get the ball out in transition, easy buckets, do a good job of helping out Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen so that they don't just have to protect the rim every time they get blown by. You have a little bit more of aggressiveness, a little bit more of a focus at getting deflections and making sure that you're forcing bad passes and just overall giving the shot profile that you want to give up. So I feel like it's more of the defensive end than the offensive end because they kind of work in concert, so to speak. So I would say that because, I mean, there's nothing, I think, to be concerned about anywhere about this offense at any point of the year.
Right. So I do wonder with this is if it's connected to the fact that they've been so good in the first half throughout the season. Their net rating in the first half of games is almost 14, which is second in the NBA, only behind OKC. Like they go into halftime more often than not, just with these huge leads. And I think it is this is a league where it's a game of runs, right? Like teams are going to come back in games, and that doesn't happen a ton against the Cavs. I think they've been pretty good at not allowing those letdowns to really snowball to the fact where they lose games. Like they will give up points and they will maybe see their lead cut into, but they don't necessarily see their lead totally evaporate very often. And I think that is a good thing. But I also think it's easy when they're up by 15 points at halftime to maybe take their foot off the gas coming out of the locker room. That is one thing I'm with you that certainly could be something that could be better and is something to monitor, because when they get to the postseason and these margins for error shrink down a little bit, well, that's when you could maybe see that third quarter bite them a little bit. So that's your first thing. The first thing I have, Spencer, is how long does it take DeAndre Hunter to get up to speed? Obviously, he's played, as we record this, one game so far with the Cavs. As you listen to this, he's most likely played 2 games with the Cavs, counting that game against Toronto just before the All-Star break. And he started night 1 against Minnesota. I thought he looked good, but I do think that when someone is acquired during the middle of the season, it's going to always be a work in progress type of thing. And it's not fair to expect him to look like he understands everything that's going on with Cavs or look like a guy that has been there all season long. But I do think if he looks the part, if he looks like the guy the Cavs traded for by the end of this season, I think that this is a team that's going to go to an entirely new level, that despite the fact that they are the best team in the Eastern Conference by every metric you can find, despite that, I think they have levels they can get to with DeAndre Hunter that we haven't seen yet.
And Evan Mobley even said before that move that they were a championship team. This is only something that just accentuates that belief and makes them even more powerful in really 2 ways. Just you have somebody who's in a low usage role offensively who can shoot threes, is having one of the best seasons in the league off the bench. And he's obviously been in the starting lineup just because of Max Strus's, little ankle injury that he had, sore ankle. So Hunter was able to make his debut as a starter next to Evan and Jarrett. But I'm curious to see what happens. Max Strus, when he gets back, does DeAndre come off the bench and play with Ty Jerome, who he's very familiar with? I think that would also kind of help the process along a little further. Evan did mention that he's hooped with him over the summer because they do share the same representation at Wasserman. Right. You also have the connection with Darius Garland being picked back-to-back in 2019. So that part might not be as hard. He said, DeAndre that is, that it's going to be the cuts. It's going to be the timing. It's going to be that kind of getting on the same page and the spots that the guys are going to be in. Defensively, I feel like you're not going to really have too much of an issue because you have those guys behind you protecting, and DeAndre is going to be allowed to be more aggressive, similar to what we saw a couple years ago when Max Strus entered the fold, and he was able to be more aggressive and be his best self defensively, and that's what is kind of advantageous about having Evan and JA behind you. So DeAndre is going to be able to be up on the ball a little bit more. He did get a little handsy in his debut. He had 5 fouls. Some guys, on cuts, and he was just a little bit too over aggressive. Jalen Tyson also had 5 fouls, and they were joking with each other in the locker room.
He fouled out. He had 6.
Yeah, they were joking in the locker room. They were watching each other's film, so that was pretty funny. But I think that, it's that kind of, I would say 3 to 4 weeks. So, more like a month for a benchmark. And that's when you got to start ramping up. You get towards the playoffs because a month into it, you're basically going to be there. You're going to be in like March 23rd, 24th, whatever it may be. And this is something I asked Kenny Atkinson too before the game was, what is it like to bring a guy in, he plays 2 games, and then you have an all-star break in between to ruin like everything that you might have gotten a little bit of progress on? And that's an awkward pause. You play 2 games and then you have a break and then you come back. But luckily, like Kenny said, they have 2 practices before their next game, obviously, in Brooklyn on Thursday night. So we will see how long it takes for DeAndre to get acclimated. But I feel like him being a veteran, him having, a couple of guys that he can lean on already, and just the fact that the Cavs are the juggernaut that they are, I feel like it might not be as long as we think, but it'll still take some time.
Right. Not to give you credit, but I did think that was a good question because you don't, and the trade deadline happens this time every year where teams acquire guys. And I actually do think it comes at a perfect time from a personal standpoint because we forget, like, DeAndre Hunter is more than just a basketball player. He's an actual human being too, and has to uproot his life from Atlanta to Cleveland now, where he's going to be for the foreseeable future. And that break, I think, gives him some legitimate time to get his life in order, and that could show some benefits on the floor as well. But I do think it's interesting how the Cavs are going to handle this. I'm going to make the case now too, because I think that he should be in the starting lineup, and I think that he complements everything else that Cavs have perfectly with his size, with his aggressiveness. I think he fits alongside Evan Mobley tremendously. And the other aspect of this too is he has spent the majority of his career, Spencer, as a starter, right, in Atlanta. This year has really been the first year with the Hawks that he's been somebody that has come off the bench, that he's been in that 6-man role. And he kind of only did that because that's what the Hawks needed. And I don't think that the Cavs need the same scoring punch off the bench with their second units, because you mentioned Ty Jerome, who's been awesome this year. Those second units have one of Darius Garland or Donovan Mitchell in them. It's got one of Jarrett Allen or Evan Mobley in those second units. So I don't think that they need DeAndre Hunter to be the 20-point per game guy off the bench in the same way that the Hawks do. Like, I think that his role in Cleveland is so much different than what it was in Atlanta. And I think because of that, it makes way more sense to have him in the starting lineup with the Cavs than maybe it did with the Hawks. And, I still think that there's obviously a really big role for Max Strus. I think there's a really big role for Dean Wade, Isaac Okoro. Like, all of those things are still true. But I think the best 5 for the Cavs is probably the core 4 with DeAndre Hunter. I think that's what we're going to see. I don't know if we're going to see that immediately. Like, maybe it's going to take some time for him to get ramped up, but ultimately I think that's what Kenny Atkinson and this coaching staff should land on. We've got more things that we're interested in learning about the Cavs before the regular season ends and the playoffs begin. We'll get to those next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show brought to you by Prize Picks. Football season might be over, the basketball action just heating up, and there's no better way to get in on the excitement than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. It's simple. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. With Prize Picks, you control the action all season long. Maybe this week you might be looking at Jason Tatum when Boston gets back in action to score more than 29 points, or Anthony Edwards when Minnesota gets back on the floor for more than 25. What I love most about Prize Picks is how quick and easy it is to make picks. It takes less than 60 seconds to set your lineup. Plus, their fast and secure withdrawals mean that you get paid in as little as 15 minutes when you do win. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNBA, that is LOCKEDON NBA, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDON NBA, for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. All right, Spencer, what is your number 2 thing that you are interested in finding out about the Cavs before the regular season ends?
Can they defensive rebound consistently? It drives me nuts to see when they get stops and then all of a sudden, they're just not finishing possessions defensively. And this is only a January. It's not like anything that has like plagued them the whole season, but it's just a little irritating when they do all the work that they do to force bad shots, to get contests, and they just don't come up with the rebounds. And part of this too is a lot of the times teams taking threes, they're long rebounds. So it's not easy for, Jarrett Allen or Evan Mobley to collect if it's coming off back rim and it's bouncing out towards the perimeter. That's more on the guards that have to kind of track it a little bit better. And, you got to definitely get a body on guys to box out on offensively. And then I know a lot of guys try to leak out too because they play fast, but it's just, these are very like minuscule things, but you got to make sure that you're getting the boards if you're putting in all the work defensively to get stops. That's really simple, I feel like, but also something that you can look out for.
Right. So I don't think it's a minuscule thing because I do think that they've been harmed in those areas. Like if you look at some of their losses, particularly in January, like those games against Houston, they got destroyed on the glass. And the Cavs, as we record this, they're 14th in the NBA in rebounding rate. They are collecting exactly 50% of the available rebounds, which is fine. It's not as if they're a bad rebounding team, but for a team that plays a traditional big man for all 48 minutes of close games with Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen, you would think that they would rebound a little bit better. Now, part of it is they don't necessarily have wings that are great at rebounding, and DeAndre Hunter doesn't come in and fix that because he historically has not been a very good rebounder either. And when you have smaller guards, that is something that hurts too, because Donovan Mitchell, I think when he needs to go rebound, he does. And I think he has a really good sense of that moment when he's able to go say, hey, okay, well, we're down a little bit here in terms of personnel. I have to go collect 5 or 6 rebounds in this game. And we've seen Donovan be able to do that, but that's just not who he is every single night. And I think that is one of the weak spots for this Cavs. I do think that if they are going to be a team that wins a championship this year, that is an area where they do need to improve. I just had overall defense. Like, can they get to an elite level? And I think that the way this roster is built, especially now with DeAndre Hunter, I think that they have all of the pieces to be an elite level defense. And I know that the common pushback is, well, you look at, they've got smaller guards. It's difficult to be a really good defensive team with smaller guards. And that's a fair thing. I don't necessarily have a pushback on that, but we've also seen them be the best defense in basketball, deploying both Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. We've seen Donovan Mitchell be a part of multiple top 5 defenses throughout his career, both with the Cavs and when he was with the Jazz in Utah. Like, this is something that I just don't understand why they have. And okay, I shouldn't say that. I understand why they haven't been a great defense. It's because they've tried a lot of different things. But what are they really good at on that end? And can they do more of that and less of the other stuff?
It's a good point. I think, too, it's just a lot of it's guard your yard. Make sure that you're staying in front one-on-one. I know that Kenny's deployed all kinds of defenses. We've talked about this ad nauseum. He'll go to the 2-3 zone. He mentioned playing a box and one against Anthony Edwards the other night. The one thing I do like particularly about their defensive approach is they never let the other team's best player beat them. They do such a good job of keeping them inefficient. Like I think back to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I look at Jason Tatum having an inefficient night. Even though it came on a winning end, I still look at the amount of field goal attempts that the best players take against the Cavs. And most nights, it's not over like 45%. And I think that's a win when you play against superstars in this league. And you look at even Anthony Edwards. He dropped 44 against the Cavs, but it wasn't a very efficient night. And I mean, that's, I think, a really winning formula when you're not letting everyone share the rock and you kind of bait them into those individual games. I feel like that can really pay off.
I think that's a good point. And even in, I'm trying to think back, and I don't have the box scores memorized from all 3 games against Boston, but I don't think that Jason Tatum has necessarily been the Cavs killer this year. Like, he's not necessarily been the reasons why Boston has won the 2 games that they've won against the Cavs. And in the game the Cavs won, I thought the Cavs defended really, really well, forcing him into some tough looks, despite the fact that he got Darius Garland switched onto him quite a bit in that game. And that is a good point. And I think that the other aspect of that, with the stars not beating them, there have been nights, and you brought up Anthony Edwards' game against the Cavs last week, there have been nights where guys have gone off. But I think it's important. Edwards had 44 points, but the Wolves only scored 107 as a team. Like, the percentage of his team's points that he's getting is really high, but that means no one else is beating you. Like, if the star is going to have a good night, And not to say that Edwards was the most efficient. I mean, he started 1 of 10 from the floor in that game. But I think it's really important that if the Stars are going to have a good night, nobody else can. And the Cavs have done a really good job with that balance. I think that's one of the better things about what they've done defensively. So the next thing I have on my list is what does the end of the season look like? And by that, I mean, how early do the Cavs clinch the number 1 overall seed? How does Kenny Atkinson manage the end of the year in terms of balancing resting guys versus getting guys ramped up for playoff minutes? I think one of the best things, Spencer, that Kenny has done this year is he has kept the minutes down for a lot of the star players. You look at Donovan Mitchell playing a career low in minutes, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, like all those guys, their minutes are down from what their career averages are. And that's a great thing towards keeping them fresh. But the other side of that coin is, well, when the playoffs arrive, I would expect, maybe not in the first round, but certainly second, third, fourth rounds, I would expect Donovan Mitchell to be playing 35 plus minutes a night. I would expect Darius Garland to be playing 35 plus minutes a night. Evan Mobley, same thing. And what does that ramp up period look like versus do the Cavs have the number 1 seed clinched by the first weekend in April and don't have to play for anything during the rest of the regular season? That process is something that is going to fascinate me.
It's a good question, especially because Kenny has elements of old school and new school in him. I feel like they're not going to straight up rest guys. Like I could see it say
they will have games because they've already had games where they've done it. Like Donovan has missed 2 games with rest designations. One of the games Darius missed was very clearly rest. Like they have done that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but not as frequently as other teams is kind of my point. And I think the thing with Kenny is I think he doesn't want them to not be in a rhythm going into the playoffs. So maybe towards that last week, he chooses like a half to play or a quarter to play for his guys, not flat out resting them. And it'll upset a lot of gamblers, but playing like 20 minutes or something and making sure that they're still in game shape, in game rhythm, not losing the chemistry. You're obviously still trying to, as we mentioned earlier, implement DeAndre Hunter into this. You know that Dean Wade will probably be kind of ramping back up. Isaac Okoro, where's he a part of this too? Like those are still things they're going to have to figure out. And there's nothing like they're all set in stone going into April. There's still going to be a ramp up period. So there's a number of different rotations you're figuring out. There's a number of different minute allocations you're figuring out. You're also, this is going to be a part of my point, but you're also going to be figuring out what your playoff rotation is. Is it going 9 deep, 10 deep? Kenny going to have decisions to make on that front. So there's a lot of elements that go into it, but I don't think he's going to flat out rest guys. Maybe like, it sounds bad, but maybe on Fan Appreciation Day, like he'll rest guys.
That should not be Fan Appreciation Day. My take here, Fan Appreciation Day should be the second to last regular season game because that's when guys actually play. That last Sunday of the calendar year, or of the NBA calendar year, I guess. I don't know the exact date right now. I don't have the calendar pulled up in front of me. But nobody plays across the NBA. Like, unless your team is battling for seeding, battling for positioning. I mean, we even saw last year with the Cavs where if they win that game, they would have been, the 3 seed, right?
Yeah.
If they win that game, they're the 3 seed. They lose it, they're the 4 seed. Fine, whatever. They still got out of the first round. But they didn't even play guys then. Like that should not be Fan Appreciation Day. That should be Nobody Plays Day or Cleveland Charge Day. That's what that should be retitled.
Something that we'll see that's similar to last year is that JT Thor will be on the court on that game.
I would imagine so.
So there you go. But in all seriousness, like they still have things to iron out. They're not going to just flat out say, all right, you guys take the last week of the season off. I don't think that that's in their DNA or in their blood, but you could see the kind of scaling back, so to speak, and maybe giving more playing time to the guys on the bench. Like you're going to see like Jalen Tyson and Craig Porter Jr. and those guys get more minutes as we approach, but I don't think there's going to be a flat out rest. But I do think this though, in the latter half of February and going into like the first couple weeks of March, I bet you we see games where Donovan and Darius and Evan are playing 35 plus because Kenny has mentioned the ramping up towards the postseason to where the minutes and getting guys' bodies used to a little bit more of a load. I feel like that is probably plausible.
Right. And there's a point in the schedule that I think that's possible. And I want to talk about that next. And you brought up the play up lineups. I'm guessing that's where you're going to go with your third thing. So we'll dive into that next right here on Locked On Cavs. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you get the money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on turbotax.com. That is turbotax.com, turbotax.com. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. If you're watching the show on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. And Spencer, you brought up the guys playing like 35 plus minutes a night in spurts just to sort of build up towards the postseason. And I look at that West Coast trip as to where that's when the Cavs could do that. So they go out west. They have a 5-game road trip from March 18th through March 25th. And all of the teams they play on that trip are mid. All of them. You've got the Clippers, who are a fringe play-in team. You've got the Kings, a fringe play-in team. The Suns, a fringe play-in team. The Utah Jazz, the worst team in basketball. And Portland, who has played well lately. I don't know what they're going to look like in late March, though. So I think that could be, despite the fact that the Cavs should win several of those games in blowout fashion, I think it's the chance for them to maybe start to ramp up those minutes at that point in the season.
It's a good idea. And like you said, like especially if they're in control of their own fate, we're going to have to see what the standings look like at that point. You do have other teams that are going to be trying to fight their way in to the postseason. So that's also a good thing because the Cavs will be playing some very meaningful games at that point of the season. And knowing that the other opponent has everything to lose and the Cavs pretty much have nothing to lose, that is a good setup for them. I think that, getting guys back up to that level will probably be a little bit easier just because we know how many times the Cavs played their core four, 35, 36, even 37 plus minutes under JB Bickerstaff. So they've been used to that. It's just getting used to it again, if that makes sense, because it hasn't been the case this year. And that's, can I bring up my third point now? Because it kind of has something to do with that.
Let's hear your third point.
Yeah. So can they stay healthy the rest of the way? Like, Dean Wade and Isaac Okoro, those are going to be the guys that are getting, reinserted a little bit. Can we get to, mid-April with a full roster? That's my question. And the way that Kenny's managed the minutes and he's managed the rotations and played 10, 11 deep every night, I think that that's very possible. And we haven't seen that in a while. Like, you're used to seeing the Cavs limp into the playoffs. Like Donovan Mitchell having...
Spencer, off the top of your head, how many games the Cavs have played this year with their full roster available?
One
is correct. It was the loss in Oklahoma City. That's the only game where everybody's been available for the Cavs this year. And of course, that has changed partially because the roster looks different than it did for most of the year with the trade, but they've not been healthy all season long.
Hard to believe, too, when you look at that record.
Well, and they're still, they have the best record in the East still.
Mm-hmm. How many times, though, like, you think about, like, in the last 3 years, 2 years, I'm losing track of time, but, like, Donovan has, an achy knee, right? Karis LeVert no longer a part of the team, but also, like, inflammation. You have,
achy knee.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Max Strus had something wrong with him, too, last year. These are all things that were accumulative over the year of basketball and playing so many minutes. I think now it adds up when you don't play 5 to 6 minutes fewer per game. Like, multiply that by 40, that's what I'm thinking in my head. And that's the total that will be drastically different than what we've seen in the past. So can they be healthy going into the playoffs with a full roster? I'm curious about it. I really am.
I am too, and that kind of gets me into my third point, and I thought you were going to go here. I thought we were going to have the same one, but what does the postseason rotation look like? Because if they are fully healthy, Kenny Atkinson's going to have some decisions to make. I think part of the reason why, and I know that George Niang was really important inside that locker room for the Cavs, but I think part of the reason why it was a little bit easier to part with him is because I don't think that he would have been part of the postseason rotation. Maybe he would have gotten minutes in a first round series, but as you get deeper into the playoffs, where the Cavs certainly plan and should be planning on being, I don't know that he's somebody that could have stayed on the floor against some of the better teams when the matchups are really, really important. Now the Cavs have a smaller rotation because they did a 2-for-1 trade. So they've got it. Maybe it's a little bit easier for Kenny Atkinson, but is he still going to play 10 guys in the postseason? Is it going to go down to 9? Is it going to go down to 8? Like, what does that look like is something that fascinates me.
Matchup dependent. And, I think we have to really give a look. Like, everyone kind of maybe assumes, like with Isaac Okoro and Dean Wade in there, that maybe Sam Merrill would get kicked from the rotation, but he's been one of the best defensive players on the team this year. So can you really kick him from the rotation?
Anytime you bring up Sam, that's what Kenny brings up. Like, Kenny is very high on Sam Merrill, but it's also worth noting too, in that one game against OKC that we just talked about, Sam Merrill was the guy that was not in the rotation. Now, at that point, he was not shooting the ball well. In the month of February, he's shooting 56% on 3. We'll see if that keeps up, but that is something that, to me, like, I noticed that, and I've locked it in the back of my brain.
Yeah. And, Ty Jerome maybe was going to be on the outside looking in at the beginning of the season, but Kenny, he said that he's forced his hand. So I would say that Ty Jerome is definitely a part of this rotation. And not even just that, but maybe one of the most important players on the Cavs, just as that third ball handler and, that backup point guard when one of the guys in the core 4 is out. So, yeah, you look at how you picture it. Do you want to go down the list and say like who you think's going to be in? Like, because I'm curious too. Like, because sorry,
no, go on.
No, I was gonna say, like, if they play like the Magic or something, like I could totally see like a lineup with like Dean and DeAndre and Evan and Jarrett in there. Like, it could be really interesting, like matchup dependent wise with those guys.
Right, it very much could, and I think that the starting 5 should include DeAndre Hunter. I think he's the perfect fit alongside the rest of the core 4. If everybody's healthy, I think Dean Wade plays. I think Max Strus plays, so that gets you to 7. After that, Ty Jerome is going to play for sure. That gets you to 8. And then it's, do you want to get to 10? Does Sam Merrill play? Does Isaac Okoro play? I could see a world where if Isaac Okoro is not shooting the way that he was shooting before that shoulder injury, where before he hurt his shoulder in December, he was shooting 48 or 49% on threes. He had been awesome. But if he's only making 35% of his threes, I don't think he's in the rotation in the postseason. If he's the guy that he was before the shoulder injury, he's got to be on the floor. Like, I think it's going to depend on that and what we see from Isaac after the All-Star break, because, of course, since that injury, I think it was December 13th, he's only played in 5 games, and he did not look very good in those 5 games. So
and I think the Energizer Bunnies too. Like you could go like in a pinch, like if you need a spark, like play Jalen Tyson for 4 minutes. Play Craig Porter Jr. for 4 minutes. So they have those options too. Yeah.
I think those guys are going to be on the outside looking in, but I think if it's 9, Sam Merrill is probably that 9th guy right now. If it's 10, I could see Isaac Okoro being in it, but I think the most likely situation in the first round is Kenny's going to try and play 10 early in that first round. And as you get deeper into a series, now that first round series might only last 4 games and the rotation might not change at all. But as you get deeper into a series, we start to see the rotation shrink and shrink and shrink. I think the top 8 are probably pretty set. I think Sam Merrill's that 9th guy, and I think Isaac Okoro is probably 10th. What do you think?
I think that's a good way to look at it. And could I actually push back on an idea though, real quick?
You can do whatever you want, Spencer.
Okay. So you say that DeAndre Hunter is a good starter. I'm with you there. I also wouldn't mind if Kenny played him sort of like Evan Mobley. So like, how Evan Mobley's the starting 4 and backup 5? What if Hunter is the starting 3 and the backup 4?
I think it's totally fair.
Because I could see him even being in that role. The other thing too about DeAndre is like, he's too talented of a scorer to just let him go by and be camped in the corner and only be the 4th option in a first 5. I feel like having him come off the bench takes advantage of that a little bit, and that kind of supplements what you lost with Karis LeVert as a scorer off the bench too. I know that they have Ty Jerome, but also just adding that to the bench and having some firepower there, whereas like Max Strus has played with the core 4, for the last year and a half. So I feel like that could also make sense. And I don't think there's really a wrong way to use DeAndre Hunter. I just think that you shouldn't just let his scoring go by the wayside, because he is a 19 point per game scorer off the bench this year. And I feel like just relegating that to, okay, you go out in the corner and you be our 4th option isn't the best way to utilize him.
I totally get that. And I think that there will obviously be lineups where he is maybe the second option, where he's maybe the third option. I think the third option is more likely in the starting five. Like he's going to be the fourth option offensively. It just is what it is. He's alongside three guys that I think all have a case to be all NBA this season. But coming in some of those other bench units where he's with some of the reserves, say there's a lineup where it's Donovan Mitchell and Isaac Okoro, DeAndre Hunter, Dean Wade, and Evan Mobley. Like, one, who is scoring on that lineup? And two, DeAndre Hunter is very clearly your third offensive option, and he's in that kind of secondary creation option too, behind Donovan Mitchell. And I think that could be an area where he can, one, be on the floor alongside a couple of reserves and sort of have the space to go be more of a scoring threat there.
I agree. And can we quickly just shout out Jarrett Allen? I feel like every time I look up, he just has 12 and 12, and it's on like six field goals. Like it's just this guy just goes about his business, and it's not, he's not like pouting about touches or anything like that. He just goes out there, sets hard screens. He's been rebounding the ball a lot better, in the last like week and a half, 2 weeks before the break. And I just think that he's been just such a good soldier this year, and it's not easy to do that too when you are somebody who is capable of I would say like even 2020 nights. Like he's capable of that if he really wanted to be, and he has bought into being what the role is that the Kenny Atkinson wants him to play, and what the Cavs do and their strengths offensively, and that includes just fostering Evan Mobley's growth too, as we know.
Right. And the shout out I will give to Jarrett Allen, and we are recording this on Tuesday, February 11th. So the Cavs haven't played the Raptors yet. If he does not play in that game against Toronto, this is on me. That's my bad. But he's played in every game for the Cavs so far this year. I think that is a goal of his. He wants to play in all 82. He wants to show how durable he is because of some of the previous criticisms I think that he's gotten throughout his career. And I think that's very admirable. I do think we're going to see I think the All-Star break is perfect for him. I think the best thing for him is that he was not named an All-Star because he gets to take a week off, and I think he needs it. And then two, Spencer, he has an opportunity. As we record this, his field goal percentage is 69.8, but he has an opportunity to become the first player in NBA history to have a season where he finishes 70% or better from the field and 70% or better from the free throw line. No one has ever done that, and Jarrett Allen has a chance to do it, and I think that's really cool.
That's quite impressive. He's been extremely efficient all year. He's, for the most part, had touch. The footwork's looking great, using his left hand, trying to copy Evan Mobley a little bit, but he's done a really good job. He's almost got the yeoman's work attached to him. That's the label I'll give him. And he's just been such a good player for him, consistent. And, like you said, he's trying to play 82 games. Of course, there's going to be lulls in those areas. It's just, human nature. And, with a break coming up, I'm sure he'll just pop up, read a book, play his video games and get back mentally and be ready for that second half push. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he does, along with the rest of the team too, as we were just talking about.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting how the second half of the season goes for the Cleveland Cavaliers. I say second half. There's 28 games left, but there's a lot to watch. Spencer, very much appreciate you doing this. You can find all of Spencer's work at Cleveland Cavaliers on SIRG.org, his podcast, which you can find on his Twitter feed at Spin Davies. I don't think I missed anything. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through absolutely everything that you do, but Spencer, you do a great job, and I very much appreciate you, man.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
There he is, Spencer Davies. Thank you, too, for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Make sure you drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed, and keep it locked right here on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed. Hit that thumbs up button as we get out of here, and I will talk to you tomorrow as the second half grows closer.